many times before, reauthorize and update the Undeductible Firearms Act. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President,
Will the senator withhold for a moment?
I will.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1197, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 91, S. 1197, a bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2014 for military activities of the Department of Defense and so forth and for other purposes.
The senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, before we left for the Thanksgiving break, Senator Inhofe and I said that we would come to the Senate floor today to update members on the status of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2014. Before the break, we spent a week on the Senate floor trying to bring more amendments up and to have them debated and voted on, but we were unable to do so. We tried to reach agreement to limit consideration to defense-related amendments, but we were unable to do that. We tried to get consent to vote on two sexual assault amendments, the Gillibrand Amendment and the McCaskill Amendment, that had been fully debated, but we could not get that consent. We tried to get consent to lock in additional amendments for votes and to move a package of cleared amendments, but we were unable to do so. Now, at this point, Mr. President, the House of Representatives will be adjourning for the year at the end of this week, and there is simply no way that we can debate and vote on those amendments to the pending bill, to get cloture, to pass the bill, to go to conference with the House, to get a conference report written, and to have it adopted by the House of Representatives, all before the House goes out of session this Friday. There just simply is no way that all of those events can take place and get a defense bill passed. So Senator Inhofe and I believe that it is our responsibility to the Armed Services Committee, to the Senate, to our men and women in uniform, and to the country to do everything that we can to enact a defense authorization bill. For this reason, we are taking the same approach that we took when we were unable to finish the bill and go to conference with the House in 2008 and 2010. What we did is we sat down with our counterparts on the House side. In this case, Chairman Buck McKeon and Ranking Member Adam Smith of the House Armed Services Committee. And we set our staffs to work to come up with a bill that would have a chance of getting passed by both houses. The four of us have reached agreement on a bill that we hope will be passed by the House before it recesses this Friday, and if they do, then be considered by the Senate next week. We worked hard to blend the bill that was overwhelmingly voted out of the Senate Armed Services Committee with the bill that was overwhelmingly approved by the House of Representatives. We have worked, as we always do, on the SAS Committee on a bipartisan basis. We took into consideration as many proposed Senate amendments as we could. We focused on amendments that had been cleared on the Senate side when the bill was being debated in the Senate. We approached these amendments and others in much the same manner as we did provisions that were in the bill, working to come up with language, wherever possible, that could be accepted on the Democratic and Republican sides in both the Senate and the House. The bill that we've come up with is not a Democratic bill or a Republican bill. It's a bipartisan defense bill, one that serves the interests of our men and women in uniform and preserves the important principle of congressional oversight over the Pentagon. Here are some examples of what will be in the bill that will be considered by the House later this week and then hopefully by the Senate next week. The bill will extend the Department of Defense's authority to pay combat pay and hardship duty pay for our troops. The bill relative to Guantanamo includes that part of the Senate language, easing restrictions on overseas transfers of Gitmo detainees, but it retains the House prohibitions on transferring detainees to the United States. Although we were unable to consider the Gillibrand and McCaskill amendments on the Senate floor, the bill includes, or in the bill itself that will be forthcoming, the bill includes more than 20 other provisions to address the problem of sexual assault in the military that were in the Senate bill that came to the floor out of the committee and that were in the House of Representatives bill as well. These provisions include the following: They provide a special victims counsel for survivors of sexual assault that make retaliation for reporting a sexual assault a crime under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The provisions require commanders to immediately refer all allegations of sexual assault to professional criminal investigators. They would end the commander's ability to modify findings and convictions for sexual assaults and would require higher level review of any decision not to prosecute allegations of sexual assault. The bill will do the following that will be hopefully coming here next week. The bill will make Article 32 process more like a grand jury proceeding. Now, under the UCMJ, the Code of Military Justice, currently the proceeding that is taken under Article 32 is more like a discovery proceeding rather than a grand jury proceeding, and it's created all kinds of problems, including for victims of sexual assault, who would have to appear and be subject to cross-examination by the defense. This bill will extend supplemental impact aid to help local school districts educate military children. The bill will extend existing military land withdrawals in a number of places that would otherwise expire, leaving the military without critical testing and training capabilities. The bill includes a new land withdrawal to enable the Marine Corps to expand its training area at 29 pounds. The bill provides needed funding authority for the destruction of Syrian chemical weapons stockpile and for efforts of the Jordanian armed forces to secure that country's border with Syria. Earlier today, Mr. President, General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, wrote a letter to the leadership of the Senate and the House of Representatives in which he strongly urges completion of action in the National Defense Authorization Act this year. General Dempsey's letter provides a long list of essential authorities that will lapse if this bill is not enacted. And this is just one paragraph from his bill, from his letter. Quote, "The authorities contained in the National Defense Authorization Act are critical to the nation's defense and urgently are needed to ensure that we all keep faith with the men and women, military and civilian, selflessly serving in our armed forces." And, Mr. President, I would ask that General Dempsey's letter with that attachment be included in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we have not failed to pass a National Defense Authorization Act for 52 years. Even when, as I mentioned, in a couple cases in recent years, the final bill was the result of a process like we've had to follow with this year's authorization bill. Now, this is not the best way to proceed, but our troops and their families and our nation's security deserve a defense bill, and this is the only practical way to get a defense bill done this year. There is no other way, because, as I indicated before, the House of Representatives we can't get this bill done before the end of this week if we brought back the bill that was pending before Thanksgiving. There's no way that we can do it, and the experience of the week before Thanksgiving recess demonstrated pretty clearly that there's no way we could get a defense bill such as the one that was pending passed in this body before the end of this week. Now, the problem is that the House of Representatives is done at the end of this week. And if we use the pending bill that was previously pending as the vehicle, we can't possibly get to a conference, get an agreement on a conference, get a conference report, go back to the House of Representatives, and then get a conference report here because the House of Representatives is done on Friday. This is the only path to a bill. We've not missed in 52 years. And the reason we don't miss is our troops and their families and the national security of this country. That's why we have not failed. And we cannot fail this year, and the only practical way to avoid failure is if we follow the course which Senator Inhofe and I are now proposing to this body. Again, it's not the preferred course. It just happens to be the only course. And I want to thank Senator Inhofe and all the members of our committee for the way they've worked on this bill for now almost a whole year, and for the final product, which I believe will have the full committee support, or at least almost all of us, There were only 3 members of our committee who did not vote for the bill that came to the floor before, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, first of all, let me express my appreciation for not just in this last Monday, a week ago today when we met and put together a negotiated settlement and a negotiated bill, but all year long in the previous year. He's been very good to work with. We did our best to get a bill. We passed our bill out of committee months ago. And the problem has been, here I am critical of the leadership of the Senate and a lot of the people who wanted amendments. I have to say this, on the Republican side, we agreed finally to cut it down to 25 amendments, which I think is very reasonable, and we were denied that, and I can be critical. It doesn't do any good to be critical right now of the majority, because we are where we are, and we're here now. The chairman has stated that, looking at December, Mr. President, we only have between now and Friday at 11 o'clock. That's it. The House is gone. They've already made that decision. They made the announcement. It's going to happen. So mechanically, if we were all going to embrace and love each other and not disagree with anything, it still couldn't be done. There's no way in the world we can have a defense authorization bill this year. Except to do the negotiated bill that we got together. And by the way, when people say they want to wait till January, keep in mind that in on the 31st of December, the services are no longer authorized to pay hazardous pay to the troops serving in hostile fire areas. After December 31st, service is no longer authorized to offer 37 specific special and incentive pays, including enlistment and re-enlistment bonuses. These people in service, and those of us who have been in service, we know that they approach you getting close to the time that you're going to be out, and they say these are the benefits that are going to be there if you will re-enlist. It's absolutely necessary that they have that information, and all of a sudden we're pulling the rug out from under them after they had anticipated what their re-enlistment would be. And so if you look at that would happen those things stop December 31st. Now if you say, well, we can come back in January and do it, I can show you this calendar right here. You start on the 6th of January, and we're going to be in the CR on the 15th. There is no way that they're going to pay any attention to defense authorization during that time period. There just isn't the time to do it. And if you stop, I think I won't be redundant and repeat the things that the chairman talked about that wouldn't happen. But if you take some of these areas like Gitmo, sure, that's controversial. But in the absence of doing something, that stays just like it is. But certain things are going to expire. It would restore this bill, the NDAA, the 1-year prohibition on transferring Gitmo detainees. You might remember last year we had that 1-year prohibition. That expires. When that expires, anything can happen. And of course, we also had passed prohibitions on construction and modifying facilities in the United States. All these things come to an end if we don't have this bill. Now, we covered this, and I appreciate the fact, and I want to repeat what the chairman said, that we actually had and cleared and considered some 87 amendments, and we got in this bill 79 of the amendments, and that's Democrat and Republican amendments. So we have done this in the areas where we are supposed to be accomplishing it. I looked at some of the things in military construction, that any major projects that are currently under construction will have to stop work. I mean, they can be partway through a project, and for example, the bill contains $136 million to continue construction for the replacement of a command center for the U.S. Strategic Command at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. If this amount is not authorized for appropriations, DOD will have to stop work halfway during construction, leading to a contract claims, lost time, maybe even lawsuits, but certainly extra work. The same thing I could say about areas in Maryland, Kentucky, Washington, Texas, and New York. If you look at the construction of aircraft carriers, without the congressional action that we have in this bill, to update the statutory cap on construction of the CVN-78 and the USS Ford, the first aircraft carrier of the Ford class, the Navy will be forced to cease construction of the CVN-78 when it's already 75% complete, denying our nation of this critical asset after we've already spent $12 billion on it. Now, we're talking about huge amounts of money. We're talking about defending the United States of America. Now, I would hate to think that we got here the way we did. We shouldn't have had to do that. And there's some blame to go around on both sides, but nonetheless, we have been unable to do it the way we've done it in the past. I'll tell you something that's kind of interesting. We did a study, and we have found that in the last 30 years that we have never gone into January before. Never, not once. The two times that we went in were after a veto of the bill, and then he vetoed it. After that period of time, we immediately overrode the veto, and we're home free. But so this hasn't happened before. And for people to say that it has and it's not unusual to go into January, factually, that is just not true. So we have things. We have special operations. We have, it includes land use agreements. This is a big one here that would ensure special operations forces to have sufficient access for training ranges. The SEALs, the Navy SEALs, I think many of us have been down there to the Chocolate Mountain Aerial Gunnery Range in California, which serves an indispensable role in training the Navy SEALs for deployment. Failure to adopt the NDA agreement that we're talking about now will result in sending Navy SEALs to combat with insufficient training, undermining mission effectiveness, and increasing the risk of their losing lives. So we have every reason to be concerned about this. We have only one way that we're going to be able to get a defense authorization bill. If we don't do it, this will be the first year in 52 years that we haven't had one. And so that's how serious this is, and I do applaud I don't like the way that it was done, but I like the end product, and I think so many people, if you look, I think the chairman mentioned the sexual assault discussion that we've had. We had the Gillibrand bill, we had the McCaskill bill. We didn't get a chance to, the amendments, we didn't get a chance to talk about those, but we actually have 27 specific reforms to support victims and encourage sexual assault reporting, expanding, and so forth. So we've done a lot, and I don't think anyone can argue that we would in any way be better off not to have an authorization bill or to just lump it together and put it on a clean CR. That's not any way to do business. It doesn't accomplish any of the things that I just mentioned and the chairman just mentioned as progress in this bill. So with that, I'm happy to join the chairman of the committee in a bipartisan way to help to try to defend America. And the first thing we need to do with this is to pass our negotiated bill. Yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to engage in colloquy with the chairman and ranking member if necessary.
Without objection.
As we discuss this legislation or lack of legislation, which may be unique in the history of the United States Senate in that for 51 years this body has passed a defense authorization bill, gone to conference between the two houses, and had a bill to the President's desk, a bill that legislation that I think most Americans would agree is our first priority, and that is to defend the security of this nation. So I guess one of the questions I have for the distinguished chairman of the committee and obviously the ranking member is that by us not acting on this bill before the end of the year, isn't it true, I would ask Chairman Levin, that we've already done some damage to the military and our readiness. Isn't it also true that in the years that Senator Levin and I and Senator Inhofe have been together on the Armed Services Committee, we've never tried to do an authorization bill in a week? There's just too many issues that are worthy of debate and votes on the part of this body. So isn't it true, I would ask Senator Levin, that if we fail to take up this legislation, we will be embarking into unknown and uncharted waters? Because then we will be leaving it, isn't it true, to various appropriations bills or continuing resolutions or patchwork kind of addressing of, as I would argue, and I don't know how anyone could dispute, is the most important obligation that the Congress of the United States has, and that is to authorize the provisions in law that are necessary to defend this nation. I would ask Senator from Michigan.
The senator from Arizona's point is extremely well taken, and there is, relevant to his point, a list of expiring authorities which we've just received from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dempsey. And I put that letter in the record. We just got it literally a few hours ago, listing some of the expiring authorities, including many that, a number that I think you mentioned, and also Senator Inhofe.
Would the chairman mention a couple of them?
Yeah, special pay and bonuses, combat pay, travel and transportation allowances, non-conventional assisted recovery capabilities, the authorities to do MILCON, which were mentioned, I believe, by the senator from Oklahoma. It's a long list, and there will be a real chasm if we don't do this this year. You can't just say, well, leave it go till next year. And Senator Inhofe pointed out, I believe, that in one or two cases where it actually did get signed in the year after the year after the bill was passed, it was because there was a veto by a president, and the veto override took place, I believe, in the weeks after January. But these expiring authorities are very serious business. We're going to tell men and women in combat that there's a gap in their combat pay, and we don't know for sure that it will ever be filled. The uncertainty, and this is what General Dempsey mentions in his letter. He says, allowing the bill to slip to January adds yet more uncertainty to the force and further complicates the duty of our commanders who face shifting global threats. I also fear that delay may put the entire bill at risk, protracting this uncertainty and impacting our global influence. And then he gave us a list of the expiring authorities. So the senator from Arizona raises a very critical issue here. Now, it's not desirable for us to pass a bill as we have, but with the help of the senator from Arizona, when he was the ranking member, we were able on two occasions, in a situation where there was objections to amendments being offered on the Senate floor. I won't go into all the details, but 2 of the last 5 years, we were put in a position where we couldn't get the usual course followed, where the bill had full amendment process on the Senate floor. It had some, as this bill has, but not enough time. And then we ran into that wall, and we were able to work out a bipartisan resolution to present to the Senate, sort of a virtual conference report, not technically a conference report, but a bill, a fresh bill, a new bill, which merged and blended the bill that passed the Senate Armed Services Committee in those 2 years with the bill that passed the House of Representatives. We then, on a bipartisan basis, presented those 2 bills to the Senate, and they were passed.
Let me mention a couple of others to the senator of Arizona. The specific question was what's going to happen if what expires on December 31st. In addition to the hazard pay that was articulated by the chairman, we also have the reenlistment bonuses, and I think any of us who have served in the military remember, as you get close to your date of discharge, you look and you make a plan for the future as to what you're going to do in terms of reenlistment. It's all based on assumptions of reenlistment bonuses. All of a sudden, they disappear. You couldn't have that. What's that going to do to our forces? Then impact aid. I think impact aid has been something that people don't really think about unless they happen to be in an area that has a lot of military activity, where people have been taken off the payrolls, off of the tax rolls, and on January 1st, impact aid would end. So, yeah, there's a lot of concern over, and we talked for a long time about what will happen with this bill in terms of partially military construction that's partially done, or the building of the various platforms. But what will actually happen as of January 1st would be really a crisis if we were to have to stop these things.
Well, first of all, and I probably should have said this at the beginning, I'm very proud of the leadership that both Senator Levin and Senator Inhofe have provided to the Armed Services Committee. I serve on a number of committees and have served on a number of committees in my time here in the Senate. And the bipartisanship and cooperative legislating that is exemplified by both senators, to me, it makes me proud and makes me believe that there is still some hope for bipartisanship here in the United States Senate. And your leadership, I think, has been vital in putting together an authorization bill, which I think is, as we described, as incredibly important. I would ask both my colleagues, I'm hearing now from, especially on this side of the aisle, that, well, it's okay if we let this go over into January. After all, we've only got another week. We've got the Farm Bill. We've got the budget agreement, et cetera. And so why not just, in the House, the other side of the Capitol is going out of session. Why isn't it just okay to wait till January? We'll be back early in January and work on this legislation then. I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'd ask the chairman if that isn't nearly as easy as it sounds, even if, contrary to custom in January, that we would do anything legislatively.
Well, the senator points out the reality, which is what is likely to happen in January. But there's another reality. In other words, what will happen in January, it'll be very difficult to get to this bill because of, number one, the crushing business of CRs and other crushing business in January, even if we meet in January. But the senator, I guess the shortest answer I could give to my friend from Arizona is the following. I'm in combat. I'm in combat somewhere in the world. And I'm going to read combat pay stops on December 31st. Now, there's dozens of these kind of authorizations that are listed in General Dempsey's letter, dozens of them, that just stop on December 31st. But just take that one. Think about that. And what kind of an impression are we giving to our men and women who are in combat, in harm's way, when they read combat pay stops? And, yeah, maybe it'll be extended in January or in February, but that's totally unsatisfactory. It would be outrageous, I believe, for us not to pass this bill.
Well,
yes, I'd just like to add that I noticed here that the average time it takes debate on the floor to pass the NDAA is 9 days. That's over the last 10 years average. If you look at I used this earlier, the calendar for January. We come back on the 6th. We have a CR on the 15th. And it's not as if we're going to be spending that time on the CR. Then, of course, we're going to be faced the next month with the debt ceiling. And so I just don't see that that's going to happen. I think it's going to happen in some other way, but it's not going to have these reforms. So I appreciate very much the senator from Arizona calling this to the attention that it can't be waited. We can't wait till January. It's not going to work. We know what's going to expire December 31st, but we also know what can't happen in January because there just flat isn't time.
Well, I'd like to, and I don't know if my colleagues would like to respond or not, but I'd just like to make two comments. One is that I'm deeply disappointed, deeply, deeply disappointed in the majority leader not taking up this legislation much earlier. The majority controls the calendar. That's one of the key elements of the majority's winning elections and a majority in the Senate. And for us to wait since, I believe, June, when we passed the bill out of the Armed Services Committee, until just a short time ago, and then only allowing a few days, is really a grave disservice, not so much to the members of the Senate, but it's a grave disservice and a lack of prioritization of the importance of this legislation. And I'm deeply disappointed that the Majority Leader of the Senate, because of his manipulation of the calendar, has put us in this position. Having said that, I spend time, as I know my Senator from Oklahoma and Senator from Michigan, our distinguished chairman, have, in the company of the men and women who serve. One of our obligations as members of the Armed Services Committee is to spend time with the military. I know the Senator from Oklahoma does, and the chairman does as well. And you know, their morale isn't good. They've seen sequestration take place, across-the-board cuts that have been done with a meat axe and not a scalpel. And all three of us would agree that there are enormous savings that could be enacted in our nation's Defense Department. We haven't even got an audit of the Defense Department. Year after year after year, we demand that an audit be conducted by the Department of Defense by a certain year, and it's never happened. And so we're not apologists. In fact, I believe that the chairman and the ranking member have been zealous in their efforts to reduce waste and mismanagement and duplication in the armed services, in the Defense Department, through their work on the Armed Services Committee. But the morale of our men and women who are serving is being harmed, and it's not something that shows up in dollars and cents. But it does show up over time. I would ask the Senator from Michigan, it does show up over time in their willingness to remain in the military. I was recently down at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the Senator from Tennessee, Senator Alexander, and we had an excellent briefing from the colonels and the generals and the chief master sergeants of the United States Army there. And unanimous was their view that they believe that we in the Congress of the United States are not taking care of them. They've always looked to us to provide them with the pay, the benefits, the housing, the equipment, the training that's necessary to do their job. They don't believe we're doing that anymore. They believe when we enact sequestration and with a meat axe cut across the board, and don't ask me about it, ask General Odierno and the chiefs who have testified before the Armed Services Committee about the devastating effects of readiness, of training, of acquisition, and most of all, on the morale of the men and women who are serving, who literally don't know, some of them, what they're going to be doing the next day. The next day, they don't know if they're going to be able to fly their airplanes or run their tanks or have the exercises that have been planned for months and even years. They don't know because of us almost day-to-day trying to apportion funds that are remaining in the most efficient and beneficial way. So I stand before my colleagues in the Senate today and my two leaders in the Authorization Committee embarrassed and a bit ashamed that we've done this to these good men and women who are willing to put their lives in harm's way to defend us, and we can't even pass a bill that authorizes what they need to defend this nation with. It's shameful. Shameful. And I want to thank Senator, Chairman, and Ranking Member for the hard work they have done on this legislation, their thousands of hours they've spent on behalf of defending this nation and the men and women who serve it. I yield.
I just want to thank the Senator from Arizona for everything he's been doing for so many decades for this country, including on our committee. It's invaluable, and we're going to get this bill passed. That's our determination. It'd be a shock to, I think, every American if we are unable to pass a defense authorization bill. It would be totally intolerable, and I know that Senator Inhofe and I, with the help of Senator McCain and others are going to get this bill done this year.
Mr. President, one last comment I want to make. You know, you can listen to us down here and not get the full impact. I carry this with me. The very top military person in the country, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, told us, our committee, that we are putting our military on a path where the force is so degraded and so unready that it would be immoral to use force. That's the number one guy. And the number two guy, which is Admiral Winnfield, stated there could be, for the first time in my career, instances where we may be asked to respond to a crisis and we will have to say that we cannot. Well, we can't correct all that with this bill, but we can sure keep it from getting worse and get back and do what we've done over the last 52 years and pass an NDAA bill. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And again today, the Senate is back. Its first day back from a 2-week break. They have been debating the 2014 Defense Authorization Act. They're on their way now to a briefing on that defense bill. And this is the last week for them to work with that bill with the House. This is the House's last week in session before they go out for the rest of the year. Also want to let you know that they canceled a vote today on the nomination for the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, Patricia Millett. That would have been the first nomination taken up since the Senate changed its filibuster rules, which happened just before Thanksgiving break. They've rescheduled that for sometime tomorrow. We'll keep you posted when we'll be able to have that on the C-SPAN networks.